Continuing debate of the honourable member for Cumberland-Colchester.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's always a pleasure to rise in the House. I'm going to split my time today with the honourable member from Stormont, Dundas, South Glengarry. A great guy, fantastic guy, and I look forward to hearing his words of wisdom here this afternoon. You know, Speaker, primarily, even though the costly coalition wants to talk about climate change, this is about the duplicity of this NDP-Liberal government that Canadians have sadly had to put up with for a long time. You know, what they continue to want to somehow, I'm not sure why, but induce scandal upon themselves and keep facts hidden from Canadians. And of course, today the facts are, as presented from the secret report, which was in some way, shape, and form actually made available this morning, that their carbon tax is going to cost Canadians $30.5 billion, yes, billion with a B dollars, which turns out to be about $2,000 per Canadian family. And certainly this is above and beyond the direct costs of the carbon tax at the pumps, on your heating bills, and on food. So, Speaker, this is really no surprise. There are many, many things that this government has wanted to keep hidden, and thankfully to the great work of my colleagues here on this side of the House that we have been able to uncover many of those things. Certainly, though, when we look at the carbon tax, there's just the government would have you believe it should be named something else, but it's the tax on everything. And we've heard multiple times in this House, and I think it bears repeating, though, Speaker, that when you tax the farmer that grows the food, you tax the trucker who ships your food, the person who buys the food, of course, in the end, has to pay for that cost. That is just simple economics. But good luck trying to explain that to the costly coalition. It really fascinates me because it appears that their constituents, maybe they experience it differently than those of us on this side of the House, Speaker, because I, as I've said in this House many times, have been was a family doctor for 26 years, and people reach out to my office as a member of Parliament every single day wondering how they are going to make ends meet. And I would suggest to you, Speaker, that often the relationship with a family physician is an incredibly intimate one, where people often tell their deepest secrets. That is something that I never heard in my office previously. And certainly it's not because I lived in an incredibly affluent neighborhood and that just wasn't happening there. We live in a rural place. It's very average in terms of income. But I never heard that before. And that's incredibly troubling. So when we begin to hear this from everyday Canadians, you really wonder how difficult times are out there. And we actually know that they're incredibly difficult. You know, Speaker, though, there are some Canadians who want to speak up on behalf of others. The Parliamentary Budget Officer, and certainly we know that on television, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said, and I quote, "Overall, a vast majority of people will be worse off under a carbon pricing regime than without, and we don't expect that to change."
I have a point of order from the honourable member for Pickering-Uxbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising to offer some very brief comments in response to the question of privilege raised by the member for Winnipeg Centre on June 6th. There is a tradition in this House that when a member apologizes, that the House accepts this apology, whether people feel it is sincere or not, and the member for Saskatoon West has apologized. What I believe to be unresolved on the issue is the inappropriate changing of Hansard to try and erase what the member from Saskatoon West said from the official record. There is an old saying that the cover-up was worse than the crime, and I believe that the change made in Hansard by the member is completely inappropriate and goes beyond the scope of permitted changes. House of Commons Procedure and Practice 3rd edition on page 1228, it states, quote, "Members may suggest corrections to errors and minor alterations to the transcription, but may not make material changes to the meaning of what was said in the House. The change that the member for Saskatoon West made to the Blues go entirely against this practice. The edit made material change to the meaning of what the member said. While it was appropriate for the member to apologize, it was not appropriate for him to try and cover up what he said. I ask that the Speaker consider this point. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member for that. But I just want to remind my colleagues that when we have responses to points of order or whatever, it's always a courtesy to the members that are actually speaking and to do them on the changes between our members. So I just ask next time that we actually try to follow after speeches and maybe after questions and comments, that we're able to do those things. Continuing debate, the honourable member for Cumberland Colchester has 6 minutes 25 seconds.
Well, thanks very much, Speaker. You know, before I was so rudely interrupted without precedent, was getting to the point about the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Once again, his good nature being besmirched by this government, of course, as well. And certainly we know that on June 3rd, the Parliamentary Budget Officer appeared before the Finance Committee to say, quote, this government has an economic analysis on the impact of the carbon tax itself. We've seen that, staff in my office, but have been told explicitly not to disclose it and reference it. Another cover-up from the costly coalition. There's no surprise that to Canadians that the costly coalition wants to keep its dirty laundry hidden. This is something that it does to me, it does regularly to me and to all Canadians, and they don't want Canadians to know the true cost of the carbon tax. And of course, why don't they? Because it's a tax on everything. It's causing hardship and misery and a constant state of anxiety for Canadians who are just simply trying to live their lives and put food on the table. Certainly in the wonderful place in and around Truro and Cumberland Colchester that I represent, the Colchester Food Bank is serving 482 more households in May of 2024 than they did in January of 2023. Wow. So when it's mind-boggling, Speaker, when you think there's 482 more households. And what do we hear from the caustic coalition? And yes, I did say caustic, not costly, but they're equally appropriate. That they think that another $1,800 to $2,000 per household is nothing. They shouldn't worry about it. Food banks across Nova Scotia saw a 27% increase in visits in 2023. Last winter, it was reported that the food bank in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, where the housing minister lives, was busier than it has ever been. And certainly, mind-bogglingly, we get calls from the member for Central Nova's constituency frequently and having to explain to them why their cost of living is much greater than it is. And certainly the CBC reported that folks in Lewisburg, many of them seniors, have been going days and even weeks without a proper meal, and some children were not attending school because they don't have food. Now what the members opposite would say, well, let's just create another program and we'll feed the children for you. Why don't we give their parents an appropriate job, an appropriate paycheck, and stop taking money out of every pocket that they have and let them feed their own kids? What a common sense idea, folks. 61% of Canadians who went to the food bank last year were first-time users. Wow. They're real people, and Mr. Speaker, we know that they deserve better. We also know that the Canadian Food Price Report in 2023 from the Dalhousie University reported that a family of four will see their grocery bills rise $700 this year. Certainly, Speaker, you know that perhaps, again, the costly coalition doesn't think that that's a lot of money, but having grown up in a trailer park in very humble circumstances, as my dad would say, and I know this is not proper grammar, but he would say to me, son, those $20 do not grow on trees. And certainly we know that they don't. Perhaps it would be great if they did. We know that 1 in 5 Canadians are out of money, they're skipping meals or accessing charities like food banks for their basic needs, and 2 million Canadians visited a food bank in a single month last year. And Speaker, very, very sadly, 1/3 of them were children. We also know that this costly coalition is the kings and queens of cover-up. Where should we start with their cover-ups? You know, it's interesting, because it would seem that, well, maybe it's an accident that they're covering or forgetting things, perhaps like the former minister who testified about the Green Slush Fund had a sense of dementia. Everybody who testified there couldn't remember anything. But it appears that this is a foundational feature of the Costly Coalition. It's not a glitch. This is how they want things to be. We know there's cover-ups such as the top secret lab in Winnipeg, where we had to have 4 orders of Parliament that were all denied to produce some documents, and of course bringing the president here of PHAC in front of the bar to be embarrassed in front of all Canadians. We talked a bit about the Green Slush Fund, and we know that the chair of the Green Slush Fund approved $200,000 to her own company. Absolutely shocking. 10% of the projects that were approved were ineligible, and in 90 cases reporting $76 million of funding, the Green Fund these projects did not even qualify for funding. So, it's not shocking, but over and over again we see this thing. We hear about meddling in our elections. We hear from NSICOP that there are members of Parliament who have, quote-unquote, befriended other governments. And this is, of course, another cover-up that we're trying to allow Canadians to see. So, Speaker, in summary, what do we see? We see, again, a cover-up, costly and caustic coalition that is costing Canadians right out of their lives. They're unable to afford their basic needs, food, shelter, and in many cases, of course, where we live rurally, gasoline for their vehicles to even get to work, Speaker. We hear cases where people are taking on 2 and 3 jobs to try and pay their bills, and of course, in the coalition who allows criminals to go free, they lose their car, and then what happens? They have to take on another job to pay for that car. Speaker, it's time that the truth is told. It's time that the carbon tax is known to cost this country billions of dollars, and it's time for the Minister of the Environment to resign. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I found the member opposite's speech interesting, and he spoke about, everyday people in his riding. And I wonder if he was thinking about those everyday people while he was dining in London, England, having $1,800 worth of champagne, eating porterhouse steak, Chateaubriand, a trip that costs over $7,000 that was paid for by the Canadians for affordable energy. But, Mr. Speaker, don't let that name fool you. It's a group that advocates against pricing pollution. I'm curious, while he was sipping on champagne, were they working on this motion to ensure that they make pollution free again and that Canadians are on the hook to deal with climate change on their own?
The Honourable Member for Cumberland-Colchester.
Well, Speaker, unlike the cabinet retreats that this member opposite's government takes at the expense of the Canadian taxpayer, well, we know that not a dime of taxpayer money was spent on that very important trip. To understand from the UK point of view, who are much farther ahead of us with respect to reversing their changes on carbon tax, and also have had the incredible opportunity to meet the Honourable Tony Abbott, who also fought a carbon tax election. And no surprise, Speaker, when Australians were running out of money, as Canadians are, Tony Abbott won that election handily. So as we expect to happen here, Speaker, as soon as the frightful and running scared coalition is able to call an election in this country, we know that when the carbon tax election comes along, that it'll be no problem here for the Conservatives to have power in Canada and reverse the incredible, costly and ridiculous charges that this government has foisted on Canadians now for 9 long years.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say. There was a letter in the Presse Canadienne on the 26th of March, published by 165 economics professors about the carbon tax. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say. It says, as economists, we are concerned with significant threats from climate change. We encourage governments to fight climate change, to meet the concerns with regards to affordability to make businesses competitive while transiting towards a low-carbon economy. Canada's plan does all that. 65 economists say that. Stephen Gordon of Laval University say that economists almost unanimously agree with carbon pricing as the best way to fight against climate change. It reduces emissions, but it does it much more cheaply than through other approaches. At the end, economists say that it's just common sense. I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say about this.
Cumberland Colchester.
I would like to thank my colleague for his question.
The thing I think that we need to focus on there, Speaker, is when they talk about this need for an affordable change to protect the climate. Well, we know that when Canadians cannot afford to eat or heat or keep a roof over their heads, that is a plan that's not affordable for Canadians. And as I said during my speech before I was so rudely interrupted, that we know clearly that Canadians are no longer able to do those things. And when you're not able to eat and house yourself or keep the heat on in the winter, it becomes an unbearable prospect to say, wow, I should look at saving the climate, or should I feed my family? Right. And I know that from the Canadians that I hear from every day, that what they need to choose is they need to choose to eat first. Now, what we will do on this side of the House, of course, Speaker, is a technological plan to fight climate change, which we know will be significantly better. It will support Canadian businesses, which will employ more people, which will bring in more tax revenue, and give us that ability to look forward into the future to say, this is how we need to do things. It's not about continuing just to take money out of the pocket of Canadians and give it to the green slush fund so that they can waste millions of dollars more and giving it to their friends. It's an easy prospect, and it's an easy choice for Canadians to make to get the Minister of the Environment to resign.
Just a quick reminder to keep questions and comments as short as we possibly can. The honourable member for North Island Powell River with a quick question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll do my best to be quick in respect of what you said. I thank the member for his very interesting speech, and I know that we have a fairly different perspective, but I agree that a lot of people are struggling right now. I hear that in my riding. I also represent a rural riding and understand that transportation is a challenge and an important one that I think could be addressed in a lot of different ways. But I also am aware of how much money the oil and gas companies are getting. I looked it up. $63 billion in profits in 2022, while oil prices soared. We know that the reality is that they're seeing a bigger profit than they've seen in a long time. So we can talk about tax. I'm happy to have that discussion, but I think it's also important we talk about price gouging. And I'm wondering if this member has spent any time actually doing some research into that aspect of this concern.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Well, thanks very much, Speaker. I thank the member for the question. You know, I did have the opportunity to live in that part of the world, North Island Powell River and Comox. I'm not sure if it's exactly in that riding, but I also know that the people of that area, of this great country, are not dissimilar from the folks that I now represent in Nova Scotia, in the sense that they cannot afford $1,800 a month coming out of their pocket, and a $30.5 billion hit to this economy. I know that they can't afford that, and I know that that member is also getting the same emails and calls from people who can't put food on the table every single day, just the same that we are here on this side of the House. And therefore, again, let's have a resignation from the Minister of the Environment.
Yes. Again, my reminder to honourable members to make sure that we keep our questions and comments as succinct as we possibly can so people can participate.